Hello, hello, hello. Well, I don't know who was in here for that last bit, but wow. I mean, what an intro. A meditation, get everyone prepared for this conversation on sport and climate change. I'm actually a bit of a yoga teacher as well, so that was up my street, and I know we were all enjoying it in the corner as well. But firstly, thank you very much for joining us. It's the first time us five have been together on a stage. We're excited to be here. I'll give a very brief introduction to the panelists, and then we'll go into discussing everything from the Olympics to heat to fossil fuel sports and everything in between. And I think we're going to do a little Q&A at the end. So the title of this panel is Time to Get Moving, and it's all about sport, sustainability, and climate change. And on the end, we have got Barbara Silver, who is Head of Sustainability at the FIA, Jamie Farndell, GB Rugby Sevens, Christiana Pache, founder of E-Innovation Consulting, and Pip Andrews, sailor and eco-partnerships manager at Starboard. So, and myself, I am Jess Rogers. I do a few things. I present, I commentate on different sports, including Formula E and Extreme E, which we'll talk about a bit in a moment. And I also co-founded environmental startup Carbon Jacked, where we believe that saving the planet shouldn't be boring, all about adding some spice to sustainability. And I also most recently co-founded a community for women who want to work or already work in sustainability called Second Nature Sisters. So any women who want to talk about that afterwards, come hit me up. I know Christiana's already in the crew, shall we say. But the thing I want to start with, ladies and gents, is it's hot today, isn't it? It's pretty hot. And very apt, I would say, for a climate change discussion. So I just want to start off by a very obvious point, is that heat is impacting sports more and more. And in just a few weeks, we've got the Paris Olympics coming up. Jamie, I want to start with you, because you recently contributed to the Rings of Fire report, which came out talking all about that, basically. Can you start us off?
Yeah, sure. And you're right. Look, the science is very clear. The world is getting warmer. It's an existential threat to sport in terms of athlete health, also in terms of the business of sport itself. The point I want to get across, first of all, before getting into that, is that this isn't about adaptation. That was a lot of the questions around this report are, how can we move dates? How can we set things off earlier in the day? Do we introduce water breaks, heat breaks? For me, this report is more about being this canary in the coal mine. Sport is something people really care about. It's very emotive. It's being massively affected by the climate, but it's indicative of a much larger problem in the climate crisis. So the point is about saving every 10th of a degree. It's not about saving sport. But yeah, you're right. The Game Changer report. There was also a report with World Rugby. The Rings of Fire report. It was a lot about athlete health. It looked at a combination of temperature and humidity, and it found that there's this level around about 35 degrees, depending on sort of 50-60% humidity, beyond which it becomes fatal to compete. And especially at an Olympic Games, where you're only there because you push your body to and beyond its absolute limits, it becomes fatal, and there's so many awful instances of people losing their life pushing themselves on the field. So it's becoming dangerous to host these events.
It is, and I mean, Tokyo, obviously, a few years ago, was the hottest Olympics on record, and Paris is set to be even hotter. We've had other examples. I know I used to work a lot in netball, and there's a netballer in Australia called Amy Steele who actually retired because of heat stroke. She cited that as the main reason. Australian Open has been stopped for play several times because of heat. Matches have to be moved. And then let's talk about other sports. I mean, motorsports. How are you seeing it, Barbara, play out in your sports, in your area?
I mean, we're noticing the same thing. I think it was the Qatar Grand Prix last year, where the temperatures in the cockpit exceeded 50 degrees, and we had a couple of drivers just, at the limit of having a heat stroke. So I guess if we talk about adaptation, we could do some things. Like you could end up adding things to the car to make it still work. But then the question is, does it even make sense?
Or having a races at, all evening races, do you know what I mean? That already happens in some places.
Yeah, in Singapore typically, yeah, exactly.
And what about from your side, from a water sports point of view, Pip? It's obviously you are out in the elements the whole time. It's not just the heat, it's what else is happening in the water. It's the pollution, it's the extreme storms. How are you seeing it play out?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, with water sports, our athletes don't suffer in the same way. We have the benefit of being able to jump in the water to cool off. But certainly the climate warming is creating extreme weather events that are unprecedented. I mean, I grew up on the Isle of Wight, and that's where I live. And 2 weeks ago was Around the Island race. And every year that attracts sailors from across the world. And there was 900 participants signed up this year. And only 150 ended up racing because so many had to pull out because of extreme wind conditions, unseasonably high wind, which is a real shame. And it's not a case of adaptation. We can't just move events like that. They need to happen, like you said, Jess. But it's not just the extreme temperatures. Certainly in the water too, ocean acidification, that's damaging the ecosystem, sometimes irreversibly. And around the UK, people don't even want to go in the water because of the pollution, particularly the sewage. It's just making it not option. No, it's unoptional now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole panel on the pollution of our rivers and oceans, but not today, not today. But I do want to just stick on the kind of Olympics point slightly, because it's not just Summer Olympics, but Winter Olympics as well. It's now over 50% of past host countries, cities, wouldn't be able to host the Winter Olympics anymore because there wouldn't be enough snow. So it works both ways. Extreme heat is also impacting the Winter Olympics. But talking about mega events, so we're talking about Olympics, right? Happen every 4 years, or World Cups, which, let's take the Qatar World Cup as an example. I think 14 new stadiums were built. I mean, we all know there was quite a few question marks around the Qatar World Cup. But let's go down the kind of the building aspect. Christiana, I want to come to you because your work with your consulting practice, you know, you talk a lot about what is really what are the big problems here? And one of them is the manufacturing, is the building of things. So how do we tackle that with things like Olympics and major events?
Yeah, so we're quite lucky because we work with the designer and the infrastructure designer, but also we work with the manufacturer and we work with the stadium that already exists, so trying to retrofit a solution. So I think it's always a balance, so we cannot really use old infrastructure for something because they will need to upgrade it anyway, and some of them are not where they need it to be for running some of the events. But at the same time, if you've seen, like for example, the IOC just announced that they are going to try to use more and more infrastructure that are already existing, and it's all about adapting those infrastructure with new solutions to be more sustainable. Same things for stadium, for example. We work a lot with football teams to try to adapt their stadium with more sustainable solutions so that they can actually reduce their carbon footprint, but also trying to drive down all the impact on climates. I think my only concern with Qatar, I think, is been a bit of a disaster. And if you speak with lots of Middle East infrastructure people, like that they're building infrastructure, they all say to you that they don't want to be like Qatar. That is actually quite good because once you know what you don't want to be, you can actually work around and decide what you want to be. And we have been part of a project in Saudi about 3 years ago to build a new F1 circuit, for example. That will be the most sustainable one. There is a solar farm. There is no energy that is going to be drawn from the grid. All the landscaping is irrigated with the water that is coming from the next city and that is depurated. So the things that you can do with new infrastructure in terms of innovation are amazing. So don't just look at refurbish the old infrastructure, look at advancing new infrastructure with new sustainability innovation in a way to showcase the way. So that is kind of trying to find a bit of a balance, really.
Talking about finding a balance, I mean, the Olympics is every 4 years, right? Thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people fly there for the Olympics. Controversial question. Jamie, should we have it?
No, yeah, definitely is the right question to ask because 80 or 90% of emissions come from fan travel. So for me, look, the sport has such influence, there's such power, and that's where a lot of my research is going. And I think sport has the power to become a vital part of the transition to a net zero economy. So I think there is power in these mega events that bring people together, especially something like the climate crisis that isn't war, it's not a political event, it's not on the front page. If we can use these events to really emotively connect with people, there's a lot of power there. So I think, of course, but there is a strategic approach to fan travel, and I think we need to encourage more home-based fans. I was having a conversation earlier about the Paris Olympics. It's not too popular. I'm not sure how much home-based fans there will be, but I think these mega events in the future are going to depend on fans coming from nearby. If fans are going for trips, they're going for a single trip. That was a big problem at the Rugby World Cup, people going 2-3 times. And looking at putting things in people's home countries, you know, having some sort of event within London that you can go and watch the Olympics in some sort of fan village. I think mega events in the future have to look different. We can't sit by while these huge emissions take place, but I don't think the answer is to get rid of the mega events because there's such emotive power that I think we need to harness as well as reduce the impact.
We will move on from the Olympics in a minute, but I am a little bit of an Olympics junkie. So one more question. Should something like the Olympics be based in the same place every year? There's an argument for taking it back to Greece, where it all began. Then the structures are the same. You don't have to do more building. What about that?
So we actually had an interesting, I can't remember his name, but so I'm doing a course alongside playing a master's course, and we had the head of the human rights at the UN come in and lecture us, and the question was asked about Qatar. And he said, look, Qatar, there's been some awful human rights issues, but these events shine the spotlight. There's a lot that changed positively there. If you want to have these events in Paris, New York, London, have that on a rotation, what are you really achieving? So he said, look, it's maybe an uncontroversial view, and it's maybe a controversial view, but his view, and I'm inclined to agree with him, is that actually these mega events, this spotlight, does create good. I mean, it's a difficult argument to make because obviously it creates bad, but I don't believe that we should just be London, New York, Paris, Athens on rotation.
And just I think we don't have to forget the legacy that those bring. So if you think like, for example, the Brazil Olympics, that is the one before that. It's kind of like they build new building, and for a few years they didn't do anything, but they just regenerate the whole city now, and they serving the purpose to teach young kids to have a place to play sport because they don't have it in Brazil. So in Rio, was in Rio. So it's kind of like. You don't have to forget that if we are only talking to the converter that is Europe, we're not going to go anywhere. So I agree with James, we need to bring the Olympics around because we need to showcase in different places and trying to build the legacy up.
Okay, so the Olympics is staying, probably every 4 years, but we are moving it. One more question on, you're an athlete yourself, Jamie. So the athlete voice part of all of this, is that one of the biggest things we can do if you are going to a major event? It's about how the athletes communicate about being sustainable and talking to the fans.
Yeah, the way people consume sport has changed massively. Look, in the last 10 years, it's now TikTok, Instagram, Netflix. It's no longer 90 minutes sat on the side of a pitch watching a game and leaving. So there's a really personal connection. I think especially these elite athletes that 10 years ago were these untouchable, people that you saw from afar. Now there's that relationship, and that's what I'm really interested in my research is that emotive connection. Because if we want to change, and fight the climate crisis, it's not about this top-down preaching, we must do X, Y, Z. For me, it's about peer-to-peer influence, and the biggest collectives in society are sports fans. So if we can get into this social system of fandom and use opinion leadership through athletes, through sports teams, people care about what their teams care about. And sport has this global influence. 200 years ago, there's an MIT piece of study that looks at global influence. 200 years ago, it was religious figures, it was poets, it was politicians. Right now, it's sports people. 49% belongs to sports people. So that's a platform that isn't used and needs to be used. It's really emotive, really connective. This is how change is created.
They're scared though, aren't they? Athletes putting your head above the parapet. I mean, even, myself, I get, hate mail, as it were, talking about the climate. It is so divisive, even though it's a fact. But obviously, social media, it breeds hate, it breeds disinformation. And so teams, athletes, they're scared to use their voice. So how do we tackle that? I mean, Barbara, in motorsport, we've got some particular very high-profile figures who are climate-friendly, shall we say. But why aren't we seeing that more everywhere else? And what's the impact it's having in motorsport?
Yeah, I think, as you said, we have a couple of figures being very vocal, but we need actually all of them to become vocal, and it's something we are working on. But I think whilst athletes have a role to play, there being role models, exactly as you said, actually everyone involved in the sport have their own role to play. We have sponsors that have been, increasingly asking what the sustainability plan is, and actually have our marketing department calling me now every day. Can you join this? Can you do that? Like, they can't live without us anymore, which is a good thing. But then, of course, as governing body of the sport, it's our responsibility to align ourselves to the international standards and kind of define the agenda for the sport to make sure that we maintain our license to operate. Because if we let it live like this, I mean, there's no way we will continue to be relevant in 10 or 20 years. We need to adapt, and we need to play our role in the change and do what we are responsible for. So.
Absolutely. Well, I want to move on to motorsport in particular now. Both Christiana and Barbara, you've got a lot of experience in this area. Now, let's face it head on. Fossil fuels, petrol, motorsport, okay? And we're sat here talking about climate change. So my question is, Christiana, I'm going to come to you first. Is there a world in which we can have motorsport and it be sustainable?
So I would say, when you talk about motorsport, everybody think about fossil fuel, and you think about the car being so impactful, and it's unbelievable, it shouldn't exist, but the car is 0.6% if it runs on fossil fuel. And as you know, Formula One is developing sustainable fuel from 2026 that then in a few years will be put in any car. So it's like they are actually the R&D lab for new fuel that is not as polluting as the other one, that can benefit the whole community. So I wouldn't say that motorsport is much more polluting than football or rugby. Like, the problem is the funds, is not the car.
And also, potentially, the problem is, encouraging people to buy cars, which still consume fossil fuels as well.
But not all the car manufacturers have got just, at the moment, the ECE engine is phasing out. So it's either hybrid or electric. So even if you think Mercedes, for example, that is Formula One, their strategy in terms of automotive manufacturer, they've got a EQ brand, and they're going to have hydrogen. Same things for Toyota. If you look at the World Endurance Championship, they've got hydrogen car already available to buy. So if you think car manufacturer, they actually have got a whole full roadmap of this transitioning to net zero. Is just not aligned with the transitioning to net zero that we see for sport, because we have put us in such a pressure to be net zero by 2030, I think, and we have not really thought about what the car manufacturers are doing, because they're not going to be net zero by 2050. What's the aviation industry is doing? They 2050 target as well. What the logistic and shipping industry is doing is 2040. So this idea about motorsport be polluting, is possibly what everybody thinks, but I think there are two main things to take from it. Is like the car itself is not a big contributor. All the F1 teams run on green energy at the moment. So even their production, they're doing a fantastic project with circular economy. We are involved with some of them with carbon fiber and also with circular economy for tires. They're doing an amazing job to trying to lower their carbon footprint, as every manufacturing company, because in that sense. But when we run the event, the problem are still the funds, the logistic, the aviation. So it's kind of like we should think as the sport as a whole, not sport and motorsport. And this is a very controversial thing, because I know that in UK, especially, motorsport is not seen as a sport because there is a car. So it's kind of like, well, in every other country, the sport, like your UK, England equivalent, actually see motorsport as part of the sport. UK, England doesn't recognize motorsport as a sport. So if you think that, it's kind of like, can we not just, we all have the same problem, can we not just get all together and sort it out once
Yeah, and I think as well, motorsport has a 1.8 billion fan. So, yeah, we could get rid of it. We could always get rid of stuff, but then you would make people sad. And I mean, we have enough things that makes us sad today. So I think it's important to keep this to cheer up people, because it's a passion for many people and it's what they love. And then when it comes to cars, yes, in cities we will probably be able to get rid of cars, but all the people that live in the countryside will not be able to live without a car. So it's about how can we support the transition, and not just the transition in Western countries and in Europe, but all around the world. And one of the things we work on typically, because we are the governing body of motorsport, but we're also the federation that joins all the leading automotive clubs in the world. So we have a very strong, I would say, leading position when it comes to mobility in the world. So we work typically with UNEP on developing sustainability standards when it comes to cars, exportation and importation. I was in Baku last year for the FIA AGA, and I could see all these UK black cabs in the streets. And I was like, oh, it's nice, it's lovely, it feels like we are in London, but actually you're not, and you could not breathe. So, okay, it's good that here we have electrified most of the fleet, and it's very important that the government is leading there. But to what extent are you exporting the problem, and what do you do to deal with it? So I think our sport actually has a potentially huge role in supporting the wider transport industry decarbonization. Of course, a big role when it comes to road transport, but also the wider transport industry. As mentioned by Christiana, all our championships will be run on fully sustainable energies by 2026. So either electrification or sustainable fuels or hydrogen. And so for some of these, we know that there's a little chance that they will be relevant for road, but they might be relevant for aviation or for shipping and all the others. So we are really shifting our focus in making sure our sport is super relevant for the transition, because if it's not, indeed, we might lose, the relevance and the license to operate.
Definitely, and I think that motorsport is held to a much stricter and tougher level than the rest of sport, right? And let's be honest,
love my job.
I was gonna say, Barbara, how much do you love it as head of sustainability when people are like, yeah, but motorsport's not sustainable, is it? It can't be sustainable. You must be like,
to be honest, I'm not a motorsport fan, actually, and all my friends always are shocked. They say I'm a hippie working in motorsport, which makes no sense. But I work in motorsport because I truly believe it can have such a huge impact, actually. So it's not only about, I learned to love it, and I do love it today, but I could live without it. But I think it can really be instrumental to make the change happen that we need. So that's why.
Absolutely, and speaking about it being instrumental, there's a lot of research and development, Christiana, that I know that you've been involved in around the innovative technologies that can come out of the likes of F1 and motorsport, and the developments that can happen to make things that we all use every day more sustainable. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Well, I think it's like the research in motorsport started about 15 years ago, actually, on sustainability. So it's kind of like when nobody was talking about sustainability in 2008, like F1 already calculated their carbon footprint, for example. So, and there is lots of research. For example, all the research that's come out from Formula E and all the software or the drive-by-wire in the car, that is all been transferred to your electric car to make it better, to make the battery last longer. If you remember back in the days in Formula E in 2014, we had 2 cars because the battery was not able to do a race. Now we got 1 because the battery is actually been developed so much. And that is exactly the same kind of development is in the electric car. So that is already a testament for that. And back in the days, I was part of the advanced engineering, Williams Advanced Engineering, that built the battery. So it was my team that actually developed that technology and make it better. So I'm very proud of all this development. But there is also some really tiny bits of development that people don't talk too much. For example, there is a company now doing some sneakers that have got the old tires from a car, like a motorsport car. So it's kind of this second life of product that really motorsport is also looking at. So it's new technology in one side. For example, in Williams Advanced Engineering, we also develop lots of energy storage that store the energy from the wind turbine when they actually are completely full the grid. Rather than stop the wind turbine, they actually store it down. So Newcastle has got a massive amount of those. So there is lots of examples of how motorsport has helped developing technology and also how they are helping to repurpose products that are used and not of any value to motorsport into everyday life. Carbon fiber is another one. Bionics arms, as they call it anymore, is like that's recycled carbon fibers that is going to biomedics. So absolutely amazing what.
And then, there's the potential for us to really push for the research to happen. If you take tires, for example, today we really struggle to reuse or recycle them other than burning them, basically, still. And because we are, the ones putting tenders in place for tire manufacturers to join our championships, we could actually set the standards and we can say, okay, you cannot join our championship if you don't have at least 70% of your tire component coming from a sustainable or renewable or recycled source. You cannot use these additives, or you could need to provide us with a research on what are these additives impacting, marine life, for example. So it's also our role to set up the bar very high, and then on the track there might be an issue, and then we'll have to learn from the issue. We've had the case with sustainable fuels where we've implemented already in a few championships, and we had an issue with oil dilution. And this is something the fuel manufacturer then was able to research, understand the problem, which means that when it becomes road applicable, there's already a lot of testing that has been undertaken under very high pressure, and we can make it applicable faster, basically.
Yeah, there's so much that is coming out of motorsport, which is helping across the board. But I'm probably a hippie that works in motorsport as well, Barbara. I'd say that as well. I do work just in electric motorsport for now, and I just want to touch on it. So Extreme E, for those who don't know, it's kind of like big rally cars, which are in remote locations around the world. It's only like a 5 or 6 event series that happens. And then Formula E has been going, I think it's its 10th season, and I will be presenting on that in London next month. Now, electric sports, electric motorsport, are they a hindrance or are they a help to traditional motorsport? Should we be going down exclusively that route? What do you think?
So I've got a very strange view. I think the transition to...
We like strange views, go for it.
So I think everything's help. Like the transition to sustainability will not be just electric or just hydrogen or just ICE or just sustainable fuel. It's like because of the world has got different needs and different pocket money as well, and economic development, we have to actually find different solutions that can come into play, especially in transportation. And I think that is what motorsport is good. They got the ICE engine or hybrid engine, if you want to call it like that, with sustainable fuel. They got the electric. They got the hydrogen. Extreme E is going hydrogen. Tomorrow is going to be launched officially. Absolutely amazing, and these technology are developed for motorsport, but after 2 years they go back into mobility. I think that is the really important point. I did a PhD on sustainability and motorsport, and I think one of the things that the PhD highlights in 4 years that the transition cannot happen if we choose one only single powertrains mode. That is how we call it. It's like it needs to be a number of different ones, and I have to say, very well done, Barbara, to implement as well lots of guidelines for this championship. So it's kind of like if you go to a rally event, you can see that all the races and all the courses need to be fully 3-star accredited. So the Barbara department is doing a fantastic job, as Barbara said, to set the bar as well on terms of sustainability of the event, sustainability of technology. So it's an amazing job.
Absolutely, and the deadlines are so important, and having net zero by 2030, I know in some areas has really been pushing things forward. But I want to move on slightly. Governing bodies. You obviously work for the motorsport governing body, Barbara. What role do governing bodies across all sport play? Are they absolutely critical? Are they doing enough?
You're never doing enough with the amount of things that need to be done. But I think our main role is to kind of, develop guidelines and kind of show the Northern Star, like this is what we want to achieve as a sport, and then to support everyone in reaching it. We need to understand that in some of the teams or in some circuits or in some, there's only one person dealing with sustainability, and you're all very well placed to know that sustainability is becoming such a complex topic, and you need to take so many different hats and so many different expertise to work on it. So, I mean, we are in a situation where we will need a climate, like a greenhouse gas expert, and then you'll need a circularity expert, and then you'll need a biodiversity expert, and then, I mean, it's becoming more and more complex. So our role is to see how we can support everyone in decomplexifying things, building shortcuts that can apply to everyone, so then we can all reach the objective together. You have a few, as a governing body, you always have your shining championships or actors, and so it's not only about Formula One, it's not only about Formula E, it's about the whole of sport, and you're only as strong as your weakest link. So how do you work with karting, for example, to also improve their practices? How do you work with drifting? Oh my goodness, drifting. To also improve their it's really working from the very elite, high-level organizations and companies, but also the very grassroots ones, to bring the whole sport towards your objective.
Definitely. And looking at rugby, Jamie, what's the governing body in rugby doing? Are they doing enough?
No, rugby's way behind a lot of sports. You've actually got me thinking, so I'm writing my dissertation at the moment. It's the end of a long 2 years. I'm hoping within the next 2 weeks to have it squared away. And I've not spoken about this at all yet, but one of the main recommendations I've found is around this intention-action gap. So the intention-action gap is effectively as much as you want to do something until you actually do it. There's a number of reasons that can get in the way. Now, one partnership, which is what the dissertation studies, is Scottish Rugby going around all 130 amateur clubhouses around Scotland. They've put £2 million into decarbonising these clubhouses. So the idea is that it saves the bills for the clubhouses, it gets closer to net zero, but the main aim was to get into the centre of communities and show these technologies that are needed for net zero. People can see a heat pump, see solar panels and think, oh, I want that in my home. So that's the aim of and that's what I was studying. It was a very simple design. I speak to fans before the installation happens, speak to fans afterwards. But unfortunately, over my 10-month period, it should have taken 2 or 3 months, but the work still hadn't started. There's a number of reasons. Working with volunteers was very difficult. You know, it's not their day job. There was a multifaceted, there were lots of reasons. That intention-action gap, the reasons are almost irrelevant. One of my main findings is that sport has influence, and I wanted to tell this story of sport giving this huge influence, and fans went home and installed them in their homes. But actually, that platform comes with responsibility and negative influence. And actually, the fans have seen this intention-action gap, and it justifies their own intention-action. So they actually think, oh, you know, there was this big song and dance, huge media release. We're going to decarbonise Scotland's clubs. 10 months of silence. That's a negative effect.
Yes.
So you've achieved the exact opposite to what you want. So that one of my key recommendations was, if you're going to take this approach, yes, I've found loads to back it up. This is definitely going to work. We need this. But either have your plan and then announce it, or announce it and then put resources into speeding it up as quickly as possible.
Basically crack on, because it's that disinformation then spreading again, isn't it? And the negativity and the hate around, you know, oh, well, these heat pumps haven't made it, have they? I'm not going to have one in my house, all of that. Barbara?
Yeah, I think this is a good example, for example, on biodiversity. So there is this new Sports for Nature framework, and we have been contemplating the fact of, you know, joining it and signing it, which we could have done on day one, but we wanted to make sure that whenever we sign, we actually have something to show and a plan in place. So we could do the nice PR stuff, and then for a year you don't hear anything from it. And as you say, it shows the wrong message. So we actually right now conducting an assessment on motorsports dependencies and relationship with biodiversity and nature. And once we will know what is our impact and what plan can we put in place, then we will sign, and then you go straight to action, not just commitment.
Can I maybe jump in?
You can.
Just because we've talked a lot about net zero and carbon, and net zero is one proposed solution to the climate crisis. It doesn't look at ocean health, doesn't look at biodiversity loss. It encourages vague targets. So the one thing I want to get from this panel, we've talked a lot about carbon. I'm glad you brought up nature, sports impact on nature, what it can do around nature and ocean health. I mean, you'll know us from a sailing background. I'm keen. We've talked a lot about carbon, but please don't. You know, that it's net zero is one proposed solution that will reduce emissions, but absolutely a small part of a big puzzle.
100%, and I could talk about nature all day, every day. But Pip, I want to come to you for the oceans. I want to carry on from the conversation we were having before about governing bodies, and from your experience, what are the governing bodies, in water sports area doing, and could they be doing more?
Yes, as Lara said, anyone could be doing more, but in the world of sailing, World Sailing is the governing body, and they have a great power because they're very sustainably driven. They've just released their sustainability report, and one of their powers is they can help choose which classes and sports will be represented at the Olympics, and in the future they can start writing those regulations that you mentioned and saying, yes, if you want to be at the Olympics, then you need to report on your carbon footprint, you need to set a reduction target, and particularly the biodiversity impact. Boats, there's been increased incidences on megafauna, so boats impacting whales. It goes under the radar, I think, because sailing, and as with other water sports, we rely on the wind as a renewable energy, so we're emission-free out on the water. But certainly there's a great impact when it comes to manufacturing the equipment. So that's how governing bodies should tackle the climate issues there and say, you need to lower the impact of your equipment. And because everyone has to have the same boats, the same boards when they're out there, there's a real opportunity to put everyone on a sustainable board, because then it's just a test of the athletes, as it should be. So why not say, let's all use this board that's got a significantly lower carbon footprint, that doesn't release toxins, that doesn't use anti-foulant paints. That's what they should be doing, I think.
Is that going to happen? What's the situation at the moment?
So at the moment, next month with the Olympics, one of the sports that's being introduced by my company Starboard is IQ Foil, which is a brand new windsurfing class. You'll see it and recognize it because it flies across the water. And one thing that sets it apart from how breathtaking it is actually its approach to environmental action. So the class, it plants 22 mangroves for every board that it makes, and collects 11.4 kilograms of plastic for setup to match the weight of the rig. I know that is an offsetting strategy and isn't addressing the reduction in the first place, but by drawing attention to it and saying that every single bit of equipment in this class is making a positive impact in some way, it's just set an example and demonstrating the possibilities of what sporting equipment can do.
Definitely, and I hope that's one of the good stories that comes out of the Olympics. Who knows if people are going to be able to swim in the Seine when it comes to it? I don't know. I'm a big wild swimmer myself, but let's give it another month, shall we? See if anyone can swim in it.
But Pip, you're saying a good thing, like, okay, it's an offsetting strategy and it's not the panacea, and I completely agree with you. But then at the same time, it's starting to put a cost on the real cost of your activities. And I think this is actually something that sport will probably have to explore in the future. How can we build the costs on nature of whatever we do and integrate these costs in our operation? And I think this will change actually a lot the scenario and change a lot of our decisions. If we go there, we need to fly that many people. Like, how do we integrate the cost of that? And not just the cost when it comes to, I don't know, offsetting carbon removal or whatever, but also the social cost of it. You know, if we have an extreme weather event, there is a huge impact on the financial as well. The social, the impact on people as well, on whatever we do. So building this cost of inaction and this cost of, you know, our activities and integrating it into our financials, I think would be actually quite a useful tool to make better decisions.
I 100% agree. And actually, the next thing I was going to come on to was the cost of doing the right thing. Quickly want to touch upon this and a couple of other things, then we're going to go to some questions. Right. Sponsors, okay? Partnerships. F1 Motorsport is obviously very big on this, but all sports, right? Can I ask you guys, when it comes to sponsors, how important is it that they are sustainable sponsors? And I'm also going to tag on another bit of a question on that, because with climate change and with taking action, businesses and sports don't always see it as a financial benefit. They see it as a financial burden, but actually the benefits of doing the right thing can bring financial reward in the long run. But what are we doing about sponsors at the moment? Should the governing bodies be able to dictate what type of sponsors sports have? You're nodding.
Yeah. Look, if you want to look at what the vices are of our time, you look at who's sponsoring sport, because it's a way of buying social license, gambling, you know, smoking, and fossil fuels. The science is very clear. We need to transition away from fossil fuels as quickly as possible. And any fossil fuel company that is maximizing short-term profit at the expense of the planet, knowingly so, we can't allow them into sport. They're going to be coming to sport with big money to try and, you know, buy that social license. Sport needs to use that platform. Because you know, there's a lot at the moment about divesting in, you know, certain companies. About 10% of the money comes from the stock exchange, from the money market. A lot more of the money comes from banks, comes from previous investments. So if we want to do something seriously about these companies, we need to use these public platforms. Sport is the biggest platform. And for me, we need to not have these companies in sport.
Bold. I like it, Jamie. Any other comments, Christiana?
I've got a controversial comment, sorry, it's me. I agree about fossil fuel, but in a way I disagree, because they're the biggest polluters. Some of them already starting to differentiate into other energy. If you take, like, for example, BP, they are massive polluter, but they understand 10 years ago that they actually needed to clean up their conscience, so they created a recharging point. They've got a company that does that. They've got a company that does Digibox that you put in your manufacturing plants so that you can actually get the carbon footprint and know how to reduce them. So not allow them to be in sport means also not allow the new technology they're trying to develop not to be in sport. So I think we need to find a fine balance. It's like why they want to enter and which brand they want to push, and also how we can help them to understand that the fossil fuel part, we don't want that, but it's like anything else you're developing, we'll take it with two hands and we'll try and see if it works in our sport. So actually it will be a much better return of image for you than promoting your... So I'll give you an example. We have worked with the Lega Serie A for Finale Coppa Italia in May, and the UEFA as well, because we were the pilot for the Euro 2024 framework that they actually embedded for this Euro. So we were really proud of that. It took the life out of me, but it's okay, especially in Italy. But we had Eni, that is the biggest petrol company in Italy, that wanted to sponsor the event. So I had to sit with them and say, okay, what sustainable product have you got and what you can bring to the plates? Because we don't want your brand for this kind of, although there are lots of money, so Lega Serie A wasn't really happy with me. So we want some sustainable product that you are implemented. And then in between lots of R&D comes out this Eni Live, that is their HVO. And then they could actually supply the HVO for broadcasting for the generators. That was the only things we had that wasn't really sustainable at that point because we were using diesel. So using what they're producing, we actually lower 90% of carbon footprint of the broadcasting side. So I think we need to think a bit more holistically when it comes to sponsor. It's like we don't want fossil fuel company, but they've got the money to develop technology. Can we actually help them to understand which technology we need and then showcase those technology rather than the old technology?
I do agree that it's nuanced, and actually there's you know, the work I was talking about, the Scottish Rugby work, is partnered with Scottish Gas. And when that first came up, you know, my first thought was, I went away and did some research, and you know, you're right, we do need energy companies in the future, and I believe that there are companies that are transitioning to become energy companies rather than fossil fuel companies. But I do think there are still fossil fuel companies that aren't, and you know, Shell at their most recent AGM, they stood up and said, look, our job is to maximize shareholder value, so we are going to keep drilling. So I think there is a nuance, so there are certain companies, and I mean, it's maybe outdated, but BP, their Beyond Petroleum program, I think this was 2015, I think they put 20 million into the program and then spent 20 million on advertising it. So there are companies that I think, yeah, it's nuanced, but I do think that the companies that are, I was careful with my words, the companies that are maximizing fossil fuels to make short-term value are the ones we need out of sport.
We could talk about fossil fuel sponsorship all day, but we can't. So I'm going to move on to a couple of quick fires, okay, where I want kind of like a one-word phrase answer from each of you, okay? So first of all, I'll start this end. Christiana, what...
You know that I cannot do one word, I'm Italian. So.
What sport or event is doing sustainability well?
Euro 2024. And I think Michele Uva is a massive, great leader. He comes from a physics background, so he studied physics, so he's very close to engineer, so he wants number, and he wants to give everybody the tools to measure those numbers and to take action. So we've been working with them for a year and a half now in some of the projects. We kind of guinea piggy them. Okay. So even with IES Roma, they were their pilots since 2022. So I think they're doing really well, and I think they also are reaching out to other sports to see how they can work together, because they're not precious for what they're creating. They actually want the greater good.
Interesting. Pip, over to you.
I am 100% biased, but it is sailing, I think, that is leading the way. Yeah.
Nice and concise. I like it. Sailing. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Sail GP, I think Fee Morgan, yeah, she's doing a great job.
I'll pass it on. She'll be very pleased. Barbara, what about you?
I don't think there's one sport that's leading at the moment, but as mentioned, a few entities and Sail GP and Euro, UEFA are doing a great job. Formula E in motorsport have been doing and leading on this for many years now as well. So there's not one sport winning the game, but quite a few leaders and hopefully more to come.
Okay, next quick question. What is the one thing that all sports or events should be doing? Barbara, to you first. If they just have to implement one thing, what should be almost across the board, like a non-negotiable, should be implemented? If we had like a forum, a governing body of every single sport, what do they have to do to help tackle climate change?
Implementing a cost of inaction.
Measuring and reporting carbon and nature.
Pip?
As you mentioned earlier about athletes being scared to become climate activists, they should instead empower their athletes with education and make them aware so that they have the confidence to speak out and use their power as role models.
Love that. Christiana?
I agree, it's kind of education and communication. I think communication as well is really important. Like Barbara and motorsport are doing a great job since many years, but as every engineer's sport, you don't communicate until you actually have done something, so that is kind of like costing quite a lot of times, if you think. So I think communication for the measuring and reporting side, so it's a bit of everything that everybody said together, and the education of grassroots athletes and everybody in the system, really.
Loved those answers. I'm personally very passionate about the education of athletes, and that's what I spend most of my time doing with businesses or employees or athletes. So, yeah, I think the more we're giving the tools to be able to talk about it, and we're not scared of making mistakes, the more power we can have as people, individuals.
Maybe, yeah, just because quickly on that, the two things that I've found are hypocrisy and not knowing enough. So education could absolutely bring both of those down.
100%. Last question then, panel. What can we, as sports fans or people who work in sport, what's the one thing that we could all do? Christiana, can I come to you first?
I'm very biased because we work with the sport rights holder for actually educating them on what they need to do and building their strategy and the decarbonization roadmap and educating internally and upskilling them on that kind of thing. So, but me personally, for example, I think is really showing the way to the younger generation, and I think I was really proud that my kids has been made eco warriors at school. And it's one of the things that you think, actually, I'm always worried about the industry, but what's about the next generation? That is actually what we need to encourage to do the change.
For me, I think one thing we can all do is remain optimistic. Too often people are defeated by climate doom, but as sports spectators, sports fans, we're always hoping that our athlete will win. We'll support them until the medal is crowned over their head or around their neck. So remaining optimistic, combating any pessimism and passing on awareness is the best thing you can do for the cause, I think.
Definitely, Pip.
I think publicly calling out poor action or inaction. As an example, I've done a lot of work with World Rugby, and they've got a great environmental sustainability plan. There's a lot of great meetings I've been in and great work and targets. I went to a tournament recently and it wasn't good enough. There was a lot that was wrong with it, and I took some pictures, put them on Instagram. That went through then
I bet that got to them more than an email
would.
would.
It went through the communications department, who then gave it back to the sustainability team, and the sustainability teams that they said, this was the best thing that could happen now that, we can progress things. So, sometimes public action is, there's a lot of good work that goes on behind closed doors, but calling things out.
Again, it's having the confidence to do so, then the knowledge of what is right or wrong, though, isn't it? And you weren't scared to do that.
It helps that I was retiring this year.
Barbara, what about you?
I think we all have a role to play, and so it would be about finding how your own expertise or your own daily job can support the transition. Because again, everyone is relevant, and we need all the possible brains on it, basically.
That we do. Do we have time for any questions, Annika? Can we ask? We're doing, yeah, okay. Oh, yes, gentleman over there. Stealing a microphone from us. Totally fine.
Hi, great panel, by the way, really interesting. I work for a company, we help companies protect and restore nature, so very much aligning with what you're saying, Jamie, and trying to educate the space that carbon is just a small part of what we care about. And kind of related to that question, to the sort of motorsports duo, what do you see happening in terms of battery technology and how we're going to acquire these rare earth materials, etc.? One think tank I know about is talking about, this is a bit further down the line, but literally building the materials from the molecular structure upwards, which is quite like futuristic, of course. But how do you see that space evolving, and anything exciting coming down the line that is good news?
So I think this is already applying in motorsport, because there is quite a lot of material that is used to the mold of motorsport that is not recyclable, but there is a couple of startups in US that have been part of the trial with them, and some of the F1 teams that are building from the molecules up actually the materials, so that once you've done the mold, you can put in water and it dissolve. And I was even crazy to take a sample of water and get to the lab to analyze to make sure that it was fine. So all these kind of things are happening. They are very embryo stage, I think. And there is another technology that looks at molecular building of carbon fiber, actually, to try to make it much more sustainable. That is very... it's possibly 3 years down the line before they got anything. So anything like that is happening. In terms of nature, because you mentioned before that you are actually dealing with nature, there is some really interesting technology that actually someone that was involved with data, and she's a lady as well, back in the days that I was involved, she just brought to life where she's gone AI monitor remotely all the biodiversity, and then be able to map it back what it was before and how you have to preserve or not preserve. So there is a lot of happening in the space of R&D on that kind of subject. So I'm very positive on that, because I can see the technology advancing.
Barbara, do you have anything to add to that?
No, she's the engineer, so.
Any other questions from the audience? Oh, yes, Amber at the back.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, because we touched on it a little bit in the last panel, but that connection between the health of these incredible athletes, whether they're in motorsports, I mean, all those amazing guys, they're off on bikes and their fitness levels are crazy intense. Obviously rugby too, sailors. We all have to be, if you are an athlete, super fit and healthy. And I think there is that intrinsic relationship between our own personal human health and the health of the planet. Because if you're looking after yourself, you're making better choices for yourself. I guarantee you're making better choices for the planet. And I'd love to hear more about how we can, not just the athletes themselves personally, but the governing bodies as well, inspire their fan base to do what these beautiful and brilliant athletes do as well. Does that make sense?
Jamie, I think your research on fans and everything leads into this.
Yeah, well, I was maybe more, because obviously sustainability is the climate piece, but also the social piece. And inclusion in sport, I think, is a big issue. Rugby has its challenges. I think a lot of sports have their challenges. You know, I've been very lucky to have had the most amazing experiences and met the most amazing people from my sport, and would love to get as many people into that sport as possible. And unfortunately, you know, so I also set up a company called Rugby Players Scotland that looked after the interests of professional rugby players and sort of collectively bargained with the union. And there were things like, you know, players would get invited in to train for free for, you know, months on an end with a sort of contract dangled at the end. I don't know if this is answering your question, but I think there's, you know, that sort of meant that getting into the sport, you had to be financially able to get into it. So I think sport has all these health benefits, mental benefits, you know, this wellness stuff outside. I'd love to go and have a chat with, because there is a lot in sport as well about the pressure that you deal with, and maybe wellness isn't addressed enough. So at that level, maybe there are some issues around wellness. You know, the book, The Body Keeps the Score, that goes a lot into how injuries occur because of your sort of mental state. But I think inclusion is definitely a barrier within a lot of sports. I mean, I'm sure sailing's the same, that needs to be broken down.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we're out of time, but I just want to say thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to my wonderful panelists, Christiana, Pip, Jamie and Barbara. Brilliant discussion. This panel was titled Let's Get Moving. I think sport is already moving, but it can move more, and hopefully we can all help it do that. So I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day and enjoys the rest of London Climate Action Week. Thank you, Extreme Hangout, for having us. And yeah, thank you very much, everyone.